this thing going? Is this thing working? Is the program running, Sonny? Alright. Welcome back to more ESAS. Getting back into Domo's response series to Mahler. So, here we are. This one is Assorted Complaints. And based on a quick skim of the topics, we're dealing with bosses getting stuck, stats for some reason, ranged attacks, skyboxes, self-preservation of AI, PvP dungeons, and linearity and teleportation. So let's see how the nitpicks reach a new height as we deal with this. So let's just have some fun. I have no qualms going into this. I don't really know what he's getting at, but we'll see what happens.
Embarrassingly, this can happen with bosses too.
He is acting as if getting bosses stuck has not been a cheese tactic since Flame Lurker.
I've played a lot.
This we're already starting off strong with, you know, a boss getting stuck in a corner that you have to lure them into, by the way. This is not a naturally occurring problem. You have to get that boss around the edge and then get them stuck there. Unlike, you know, this boss, which just runs around the arena and gets stuck on this big plank of wood.
He is acting as if getting bosses stuck has not been a cheese tactic since Flame Lurker.
Not been a cheese tactic. Well, what do you mean? Bosses randomly getting stuck versus you cheesing them by purposely getting them stuck. All right, let's... Hey, Sheep, how's it going? Oh, God. And already it begins with talking about other games rather than the game we came to see him defend. Yep. Well, again, it's like, that thing is, look at how much space is around the boss. And this is an object in, this is not just some corner object that the boss gets stuck on, right? This is a thing that the boss is supposed to interact with. Like, you can lure the boss to these objects, and they do things, like, in the boss fight, right? The fact that the boss gets stuck on it is a terrible problem for that. This is, you have lured this creature around the corner and then baited it to where it gets stuck. This is a very different situation of a boss getting stuck in its arena. It's a very different thing.
Acting as if getting bosses stuck has not been a cheese tactic since Flame Lurker.
I've played a lot of Dark Souls 1 and 3.
I feel like a lot of those Fortia clips are just... They're meant to be an own without actually explaining how it's an own. Because they just randomly pop up in the last couple of videos and it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing, man? What if the DS1 boss got stuck on by accident? Well, I mean, that's the thing, like... There are... In terms of, like, bosses that get stuck on things... The only bosses that I think do get stuck on stuff in Dark Souls 1 would be bosses that have some sort of object in the arena, right? So it would be like that one. So it would be like that one. It would be, I say that one. It would be like the Stray Demon. It would be like, I think Capra has a chance to get stuck on the stairs if you like are on the stairs but within like hitting range. But that's more of a baiting thing rather than him getting stuck. I'm trying to think of what other bosses would get stuck on things. Because I can't quite remember what other bosses in Dark Souls 1 would get stuck, right? And this is one thing, too. I'm not going to talk about Dark Souls 3 ones, even though he's about to, just because it's kind of irrelevant to talk about a future game than Dark Souls 2 not fixing an issue. You know, it's one of those things where just because the other games did it beforehand or afterwards doesn't mean that Dark Souls 2 gets a pass for doing the same mistake. Right? Like, I don't give Dark Souls 3 a pass for doing the same mistake as Dark Souls 2 by having some person you have to talk to level up. That's a problem in Dark Souls 2 and 3. In the original Dark Souls, you didn't have to talk to anybody to level up. You just did it at bonfires. The fact that 2 and 3 fucked it up is a problem for both 2 and 3. This has nothing to do with me liking 2 over 3 or 3 over 2. This is just, it's a problem across different games, right? The problem with this argument is Domo's not really trying to hold them all accountable. He's just, you know, the clip he showed of Mahler is him talking about bosses getting stuck in Dark Souls 2 specifically. You didn't really mention anything about the other games not having this problem. It's that sort of thing where the complaints in Dark Souls 2 are being argued against as if every argument against Dark Souls 2 is supposed to be an argument that doesn't relate to the other games, right? It's that weird thing where the people where Domo defending Dark Souls 2 comes across as him desperately trying to bring all the games down instead of defending the game that he is supposed to be defending here. You know, it's a weird thing. I've yet to have Stray Demon get stuck like this. You have to go out of your way to do this, I feel like. Yeah, and that's kind of the point I brought up earlier, is like Najka getting stuck right there. That is the tree thing is an object in the arena that she can interact with, right? Like it's a unique function that helps sort of like stun her when she comes up, right? You know, it's one of those it's just one of those things where it's like this object can interact in the arena and it does something unique. In the Stray Demon's case, like you loop that thing around and it's stuck behind something because you have positioned it in a way where it cannot escape, right? That's an active cheese versus this being like you're just leading the boss around the arena, taking cover where you think it's appropriate, and then the boss gets stuck, right? This is sort of like the boss not having AI to go around a pathway that doesn't. Like this is an example of the AI being kind of stupid, similar to this. But with this boss is able to destroy this object in different ways, and it doesn't do it, right? And in Mahler's clip, it shows him not doing it, right? It's that weird problem where it's, you know, like, yeah, yes, both AI should be able to get around this, but in the Stray Demon's case, who's going to attempt to try that unless you're trying to cheese the boss directly anyway? Right? Like this is the biggest thing is you have to go out of your way to create this situation. This can happen naturally, which is part of the problem, right? A lot of the problems with Dark Souls 2 are just inherent with the natural state of play. You know, they're not things where you actively go out and cheese them. That's not to say that like all the games are clear of cheesing the AI in different ways, but it is one of those things where there is a unique problem with some of the Dark Souls 2 encounters. And yes, this is bad in Dark Souls 1 part that the enemy can get stuck behind there. But at the same time, this is not as severe as this boss having something in their arena that the boss is supposed to be able to interact with, and it still ends up getting stuck on it, right? This is part of, and I think this is part of the reason why several enemies later on in the games made it where if an object is in the way, they will smack it and destroy it, right? And this happens in games after Dark Souls 2 and before Dark Souls 2, and also I think during Dark Souls 2. So it's one of those things that's just kind of weird for the boss to get stuck here and then not do anything to break that. But yeah, both AI are having issues, but one of them is lured into it, whereas one happens naturally. And that's kind of the thing that I think differentiates the two.
I've played a lot of Dark Souls 1 and 3.
For a group of intellectual gamers that act like experts on Souls games, they really do seem to only have a superficial understanding of those games. So many issues they portray as being worse in DS2 are actually the same or even more common in the other Souls games. Also,
one thing is his audio balancing right there is kind of hard because he's got the music blaring while the boss gameplay's going, and his audio is kind of like low, so it's hard for me to hear his actual point during this. Although it's one of those snide comments that I could pick up on. Just it's like you'd think these guys would be so good because of their intellectualisms.
A lot of Dark Souls 1 and 3.
For a group of intellectual gamers that act like experts on Souls games, they really do seem to only have a superficial understanding of those games.
A superficial understanding of those games. Would you like to see all the streams that we've done about you talking about the superficiality of the different mechanics in Dark Souls 2 by comparison to the others? We have entire streams going over this.
So many issues they portray as being worse in DS2 are actually the same or even more common in the other Souls games.
And so this is one thing is And this is one of the big things, right? Instead of defending what Dark Souls 2 gets right, you're simply saying all the games get this wrong. That's not a defense for your game. That is a criticism across the whole franchise. So again, seems kind of weird how your defenses of the games usually boil back to, or boil down to, all the games are shit. You know, this is very similar to a lot of arguments for the sequel trilogy of Star Wars in a way, because it's like, people will argue that the Star Wars was always shit. And so why are you complaining when the sequel trilogies screw things up? It's like, no, you fuck nugget. They did a lot of things right in the OT. They even did several things right in the prequels. Right? It's just that thing where people are desperate to defend the thing they like, so they criticize the thing that came before, or criticize the thing that is attached to the franchise that people like. It's this weird thing where they feel like they have to own people by criticizing the thing that people like, by referencing how it also has problems that the thing they like might have. But it's a really roundabout way of arguing where you don't defend your own product. Instead, you just end up dragging down the entire series as a whole by saying it's all shit, right? Except for the thing you like, right? It comes across as you're just being an asshole, right? You're just being an asshole and you can't actually dictate what you want to get across. It's really weird. It's really weird. All right. Okay, so what is this, chat? Since you still haven't realized it, the focus of his video is to respond to Mahler's points. Mahler has set the standard. Dark Souls 1. There should be a criticism of all the games, but he calls it a defense for DS2. He is one of those. Vangeris, you're going to love this. You got one. The point of the series isn't to defend DS2. I mean, he's made a lot of points talking about, like, well, this is the thing, right? If you're going to respond to Mahler's series, which is a heavy criticism of Dark Souls 2, if you're going to respond to it, why would you respond to it and then not defend the game at all? Right? Like, if you're going to go in as a response series to Mahler, you are inherently going to bring up points against Mahler's points, right? Because you know, like, why would you make a response series to something if you're going to agree with it, right? Why would you make a response series unless, you know, if you're going to make a response series to someone who is criticizing Dark Souls 2, aren't you inherently going to try to defend the game? Because you're responding to his points criticizing the game? Wouldn't that be something that would happen by going into this series? And again, you can watch all of the other streams that we've done going over this, of how there's a lot of things that Domo just forgets or doesn't bring up. You're absolutely right. It's to baby Dark Souls 2. The amount of times he has shielded the game from proper criticism is asinine. Yeah. Well, it's like there are problems across all the games, right? Like the AI in the clips that he's shown across Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 is a problem, right? Right? And I'm not going to say that Dark Souls 2 gets an unfair criticism or an unfair praise for having the same problems as the other two games in that regard, right? That's a problem with all the games, right? The difference is, in order to get certain situations in Dark Souls 1 and 3 to happen like this, you have to go out of your way to make it happen, right? In other words, let's just take it for example, right? Let's go back to Najka for a second. All right, so this Najka thing is you're just running around a fairly open arena, and then the boss gets stuck on an object the boss can destroy. Right? It's a very, like, weird thing to happen because it happens naturally, right? It's not like this is in a, you know, tight corner of the map where you have to lure the boss over there. The boss will go underground and pop up around you and moves around in weird ways, right? Like, the boss can destroy this object. Can totally destroy it, right? So the boss has control over this situation, and it just flubs because the boss doesn't account for this object being here when they're just trying to walk towards the player. You know, in this case, you have to lure this enemy around into this corner with an object they can't get past, and then aim them in a way where they cannot traverse past it, right? A similar thing with this, right? You have to lure this enemy into that corner, run around the tree, and then essentially, like, you essentially trap the AI purposely, right? Like, this rarely will occur, right? Like this, and to be fair, the Najka stuff too is rare to occur, but there's a much higher chance of Najka getting stuck on this thing if you just get far enough away at the angle that doesn't work, right? And see, the biggest issue with this is that this object is destructible. It can be destroyed by the boss. The boss just doesn't do it, because just the AI just doesn't want to do it for some reason. This is something where you have to actively lure the enemy into a corner where they can get stuck. Same thing with this. The Najka thing is far more natural to get the boss stuck on things just because you're moving around, and the boss will get stuck. It's only destructible when she comes from the sand. It's like, yeah, I know that, but like a lot of enemies throughout all the games, both before and after Dark Souls 2 and in Dark Souls 2, can destroy objects if they're in the way. And that's my point, is like the workaround to make that not an issue is that if the boss is taking damage and not moving, and and they're not changing position, then they should have a thing where they break any object like around them, right? They should have something to account for that, and they don't, right? That's very different than these AI, which they see the players in a certain position and they attack, and so they continue to attack and attack, even though the AI doesn't realize that it's stuck, right? Like they all have problems. I'm not trying to say these are not problematic. But the Dark Souls 2 thing had the opportunity to fix the issue and did not, right? And this is that weird thing of defending Dark Souls 2 by criticizing the other games when they all have problems, right? And just for context, we'll watch this whole clip again and watch. And Domo did not mention Dark Souls 2 having the Domo doesn't single out Dark Souls 1 and 3 without referencing Dark Souls 2 as well. All right, we'll watch it again.
Embarrassingly, this can happen with bosses too.
He is acting as if getting bosses stuck has not been a cheese tactic since Flame Lurker.
I've played a lot of Dark Souls 1 and 3.
For a group of intellectual gamers that act like experts on Souls games, they really do seem to only have a superficial understanding of those games. So many issues they portray as being worse in DS2 are actually the same or even more common in the other Souls games.
You see, here's the thing. He said that we're the same or more common in the other Souls games. How many situations in Dark Souls 1 and 3 can you find a boss is getting stuck? All right, that would take a long time to list out, but it's one of those things that I think would be an interesting discussion to talk about all of those different things where bosses can get stuck. Because part of the problem with having... This is one reason why I prefer boss arenas that don't have objects in the way unless they purposely help with the boss fight in some way. Like Ornstein and Smough, I think, is an arena that absolutely should have like objects in the arena to help with the boss fight. Right? The stuff here... the Stray Demon getting stuck and Najka in a way only really serve to kind of hinder the fight in awkward ways when the AI can get stuck. It's this weird thing of like it's sort of like it's the same problem overall, but the quantity is a thing that often gets brought up in Dark Souls 2 because there are so many bosses. And there's so much stuff in Dark Souls where things go wrong that just because it existed in the previous games doesn't change the fact that Dark Souls 2 has that problem in higher amounts and in greater frequency, right? And it's part of the problem of Dark Souls 2 that's sort of unique to Dark Souls 2 is that they focused on what's the phrase? They focused on quantity as opposed to quality when it comes to different things. Right, and that's part of the problem with a lot of stuff in Dark Souls 2. Again, these problems are across different parts of different games, but a lot of the things that have to happen you have to go out of your way to get these things to happen the way they do.
Also, I am pretty sure that this one got patched out as I spent like 20 minutes trying to reproduce it but wasn't able to. And even if she would get stuck, she can jump to the side or dive down, so she has...
I mean, this is also one thing, too. It's like, if they patch this, then good, right? But just... I mean, the thing about Mahler's footage, though, is that I'm not quite sure at what point he recorded a lot of his footage. You know what I mean? Because his videos came out in 2017, The game came out in 2014, right? Unless he's doing the Scholar thing, which is 2015, right? So this is one of those things where I don't know if it's a game version issue that causes this problem, or if it's an update to one that didn't happen in the other. And again, this is a problem that's sort of unique to Dark Souls 2, is the fact that we have 2 game versions, right? It's just strange. But I mean, like, if this got patched out, great. That's the devs fixing the issue. Good job on the devs. You know, my thing is just wondering, like, which version is this? Because there are 2 different versions of the game, we have to wonder about this. I'm going to be a bit unfair. You think Domo's going to spend that much time on the other games? No. I mean, I think one thing that would have... Like, this is one thing where I think if you're going to talk about a problem that spans across the entire games, talk about the amount of times that it does happen, or the potential for it happening, right? That would go a long way towards showing all the games in a fair light, as well as showing which game has the largest number of issues with a particular thing, right? You know, like he brought up, you know, like Mahler had the one example in the clip Domo showed, and then Domo showed one example from each other game, right? It's like, okay, we have one example from each game. Dark Souls 2 has a lot more bosses than Dark Souls 1 and 3. Would you want to break it down to show that by percentage, Dark Souls 2 is better than the other games when it comes to stuff getting stuck? Do you want to show why one game might be worse or better than the other? Is it proportional? You know, is it numerical in the difference between bosses that can have issues? You know, instead of diving deeper into the issue and showing all the times that things could possibly get stuck, he just brings up this one fight in DS2 and then brings up a couple other fights as like he could have gone deeper into this issue to help explain which game has a bigger issue of it, right? And try to make a point about the overall series across the 3 games instead of just saying this happens as well, lol. They fixed it later. It's like, it's good they fixed it later, but it's like it's a weird way to center around this argument when you could make a point about the games overall. You know, like, this is a good opportunity to talk about bosses getting stuck and the potential for that across all the games, right? But he just didn't want to talk about that. He found the one little point and then wanted to counteract that one little point with this one little boss and then move on from it. He's going to spin it as if the other games have this glaring issue on the first attempt. Yeah. And I say that because leading up to this video, we've seen how unfair he is to the other games, how he purposely misses jumps. Yeah. Well, again, like, different issues for different sort of, different issues have different context, right? Like, the fact that they patch this in whichever version of the game this is good. That is a good thing. But it also doesn't discount the fact that Mahler's footage also showed that the boss can get stuck, you know, on this object. Because if this enemy was able to get around this little tree thing in Domo's footage, then that means in Mahler's footage, it just got stuck on the object somehow. Right, which is still bad. Now, again, I haven't rewatched all of Mahler's stuff, but this is one of those things where Mahler responded in full to H-Bomber Guy's video, as far as I can tell, like breaking down everything H-Bomber said. Right, the only thing I think he cut out were the transitions from one part to the next. Domo, on the other hand, is taking very specific things out of Mahler's footage and then responding to that. Right, which is part of the thing of where it looks like you're just cherry picking. Like, if you're gonna comment on something if you're gonna respond to a series, I would respond to it in full. Right, kind of like what we were doing with the stream, or what Mahler did by breaking down the entire H-Bomber Guy script and then taking it one chunk at a time. You know, it's like, if you're gonna go this far to go through Mahler's stuff anyway, you may as well cover it in full just for the sake of context.
There's more protection against it as many other stuckable bosses in the series.
Why spend time meticulously leveling for particular stats when I could just respec at any time and change my entire build on the go?
Is he really trying to convince us that being able to reset stats is objectively bad?
I mean, this is one of those arguments that I think is one of the more... See, this argument that we're about to get into here with the stats, right, I'm assuming sort of what Domo's going for. All right, let's get Mahler's whole clip again, and then we'll talk about it.
Series.
Why spend time meticulously leveling for particular stats when I could just respec at any time and change my entire build on the go?
Is he really trying to convince us that being able to reset stats is objectively bad?
I mean, notice that Mahler said at will, right? And that's the biggest issue. Right, like part of the reason that RPG games are fun is because you are committing to your role within the role-playing aspect of the game, right? That's part of the fun of playing a role-playing game, is that you are role-playing. Being able to change your role mid-game, in different ways is problematic. Now, granted, the way Dark Souls does the way the Dark Souls sort of series and other games kind of handle it is different, right? Where you change your build, not necessarily how you role play the game in terms of what happens story wise, but it is a thing that does take away from the dedication to your stats, or the dedication to your build changing at the drop of a hat whenever you want it to, is one of those things that I think does inherently make the game cheaper when going through it, because you can essentially just hard press it through a particular build through certain areas that are weak to that build, and then when you need to radically change it to a completely different build to completely nullify the difficulty of another area, you can do that too, right? It's that thing where you can respec to pick the optimal build to get through an area, rather than just dealing with the fact that your build is not going to be as effective in this area as opposed to another area, right? Like the example that I would put is in Dark Souls 1, part of the difficulty of the late game is part of the difficulty of that game comes from the fact that whatever build you dedicate to, you're going to have areas where you are effective and areas where you are not. This is where the role playing, makes players think about what they're investing in as they go through the game, right? Like, if you're a tank build and you've got heavy equip load, right, going through Blighttown without that one ring to help is going to be a lot harder than someone who is, a light build that can run from platform to platform before getting poisoned, right? Or can just run through it as fast as they can, outmaneuver the enemies and get where they need to go, right? Similar thing with if you're a magic user, for example. If you're a pyromancer in Dark Souls 1, you'll have a good time using pyromancy in most areas of the game, besides when you fight against Quelaag, and besides when you go against demons in the Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith, right? Those areas are sort of resistant to pyromancy stuff. Similar to how a lot of stuff in Seath's area is resistant to magic stuff. It's a part of the multidimensionality of playing that game, because different builds will do better in certain areas and not as well in others consistently, because you have to go down through all these areas to beat the game. Not all builds are going to be effective at them in different ways, and it's a thing where, yeah, certain builds are going to be sort of universally effective in different ways, right? Like builds that do sort of like largely physical damage, right? And tank builds are going to have a pretty consistent time across the board, right? Whether they're defending against physical attacks, magic attacks, fire attacks, lightning attacks, whatever it is. But the differences are that certain parts of your build, whether it be your armor or your shield or your weapon or whatever, are going to be more effective against certain things over others, which again falls back to that roleplay element of you're committing to whatever you're doing. And so as you commit, you have to be aware of what those commitments entail, whether you're going to be in a better position against some enemies in some areas or in a worse position against some enemies in other areas. It's part of the role-playing aspect. And with the introduction of like sort of free specking as often as you want, or the idea of respecking in general, I think is a problem for the series, right? Now people can push back on that. That's a thing that we can debate, right? In terms of, is it good for this series to have respecking, like, period, right? I would argue no, but I can understand the argument for yes, right? It's one of those things that I think is a truly gray area that we can debate on and talk about, and it really sort of comes down to personal preference. But in terms of role-playing games, being able to switch your role in them is usually going to be problematic. And in these games, I would argue it's problematic because it changes the difficulty when you can respec at any time to sort of get through a particular area that your build may not be built for, or be set up to deal with easily, right? It's that thing where the difficulty is adversely affected by the changing of the way your build is set up. This is This is definitely a more subjective one. It depends on how you feel about being super deliberate and careful with your levels. Yeah, and this is also one thing too where I can totally understand the argument of people saying that if you don't want to respec, then just don't respec. It's like that's a perfectly valid argument as well. You know, if you just don't want to use it, don't do it. But the fact that it is there is one of those is sort of part of the problem in itself, where it's like if we can respec, period, that means several people will, which changes the difficulty of certain parts of the game when you can do that. Whereas I like the commitment. I think the commitment builds on the role-playing elements within it. All right. Sounds like I've been pulled into a fun point. Hey, Andrew, welcome. I had to get Andrew on this. Sweet. Anyway, let's get back to this point and just kind of see what Domo's thing about this is. Because we talked a whole lot about the whole argument of speccing versus respecking, and now we have to actually deal with what Domo said.
This is in the series.
Why spend time meticulously leveling for particular stats when I could just respec at any time and change my entire build on the go?
Is he really trying to convince us that being able to reset stats is objectively bad? Especially when DS1 had res as a troll stat that seems useful, but actually every point you put into it is basically wasted? Also,
basically wasted. Are you fucking kidding me? Look at your physical defense doubling. Yeah, by comparison to every other stat, it is largely useless by comparison, but it also still does stuff because of the leveling system. And poison resistance can be helpful, but it is one of those things where who is going to commit to resistance? Period, right? Based on the description of what it does, based on the requirements of everything else in the game. Right? Who is going to commit to resistance like this in this cherry-picked example? New cool you're going to commit to resistance. Okay, do your resistance run. But for all of us normal people who play these games, you're going to notice that all of these other stats have some sort of tangible effect on the way the world sort of is impacted and the way your build is impacted, right? Vitality is your health, right? That's just a bare bones sort of... vitality is just a bare bones, you have more health, you can take more damage before you die. That is just a blanket, good thing. Attunement helps your slots with how many spells you can have, which is great for spellcasters, right? Endurance is great for equip load and stamina. That's going to help anybody that has a need for extra stamina or extra equip load, right? Then you get to the weapons and the spells. They require different mixes of strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith. All of the stats except resistance have something that is very obviously effective in the way the game works. Resistance is totally a bullshit stat. I am not denying that. Resistance is a terrible fucking stat to include in this game. Okay, that's not the thing that I'm arguing against. But what I am saying is that all the other stats you will intuitively see are useful based on different things that you encounter in the game, right? You level up one of these stats. When you look at weapons, when you look at spells, you will know that they require certain stats to use. So you will put points in those stats. And as you level up vitality, attunement, and endurance, you will also see stats improve. Your attunement slots, your HP, your stamina, and your equip load. It's all very obvious in terms of what those things do. Resistance is a total bullshit stat, but it's also largely useless in the grand scheme, right? Just in general, right? Now, leveling does help with defenses and stuff, so even leveling resistance does do that, but resistance as a stat itself doesn't really do much besides help with one thing that you can deal with by just leveling up in general. But by comparison to Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, the most, the new stats, I'll say, or the stats that change things are ADP and luck, right, in Dark Souls 2 and 3 respectively. ADP radically fucks up a lot of things, right? It fucks up how iframes work. It changes how fast you can recover with items and things. It's really a really weird thing to put in the game. Luck largely influences item drops, status buildup, right? So that works with a particular build. It also helps in general if you just want more loot, right? But it's one of those things where just different things are going to work differently across the different games. And each game has a weird stat, right? Resistance is the weird stat in Dark Souls 1. ADP is the weird stat in Dark Souls 2. And luck is the weird stat in Dark Souls 3. The differences are resistance is largely useless, apart from being not impactful at all. pretty much, outside of just getting more levels. Dark Souls 3's luck is largely restricted to just one particular build based on status buildups, and also just if you want more items to drop from enemies. But Dark Souls 2 is the one that has the biggest problem with ADP because it radically changes the way a basic function of the series works, which is part of the issue with ADP being the way it is. And as I mentioned in another video, I forget which one, if ADP if ADP did not affect iframes, and we had the same iframes in Dark Souls 2 as we did in Dark Souls 1, ADP would not nearly be an issue to talk about, right? If anything, it would be a pretty cool stat that you have a stat that increases your speed of using items and recovering from using Estus and stuff. That would actually be cool. Because it fucks with iframes, that's where the bigger issue is, because they have changed iframes based on a stat instead of leaving it neutral and making this new stat just do cool stuff, which it does. I mean, again, ADP does cool stuff. It's just the fucking with the iframes is the thing that screws up the entire balancing of the game when you have one stat that affects iframes in such a drastic way. All right, I need to catch up on chat. It's been a bit. Let's see. Oh my, it helps if you aren't running heavy armor for Fashion Souls. LeMayo, I agree. See, look at the poison resist doubling as well. So much poison BS in DS1. There's not really that much poison DS in Dark Souls 1. There's like... Blighttown is like the biggest sort of like, oh no, poison swamp area. But it's mainly that area entirely. I think there's a little bit of poison that comes from certain enemies in other spots, but largely it's just that one area. So once you're sort of through there, you should be good. Just in general. But let's see. He isn't seriously suggesting to put 50 points into resist, just showing how it affects your stats. I didn't put points to resist when I started playing, and I didn't know it was bad. Or you did know it was bad. See? Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where, like, yeah, he's showing Dark Souls 1 has a useless stat, you know, but at the same time, it's like, if you go by the descriptions and you go by the intuitive nature of playing the game and seeing that weapons and spells require a mix of strength, dex, intelligence, and faith, and the fact that your roll, your attunement slots, your equip load in general, and your health go up with vitality, endurance, and attunement, you can probably pick up that resistance doesn't do much, right? Based on just playing the game naturally, right? You know, and that's part of the difference between the games is if we're just talking about Dark Souls 1 and what Dark Souls 2 did with its sort of unique stat, ADP screws up a lot by comparison to what Resistance does. Like, Resistance largely doesn't do much, right? Besides just helping against poison and stuff. Poison and just raw defense like every other level up does. You know, but just when it comes to, like, ADP, by comparison, just ADP introduces so many issues with the iframe rebalancing based on that stat. You know, it's it's essentially a wasted stat in terms of why did you bother creating this stat, which fucks with iframes. You know, resistance is largely ignorable. You can completely ignore resistance and you'll be fine, right? But you kind of have to use ADP if you want the same level of iframes to deal with some shit in Dark Souls 2. It's just a very like weird thing to talk about when it comes to the stats that are introduced over time. It's just a weird discussion in general, just because of how weird things get between the different games. Like, I don't know why they put resistance in Dark Souls 1, like, to begin with. Like, I had no idea why. No idea why. Let's see. Hi, Chat and Vangaris. Hello, Shan. See, if someone wasted 10 to 20 to resist, respecking would be great. I mean, that would be good to be able to respec out of it, but at the same time, you don't see resistance doing anything. Like, besides stuff other like if you just like tick 1 point in everything to see what it does, you'll notice that a lot of other things work to help you in different ways, whereas resistance just boosts poison and then does what every other level does. Like, by playing the game, you will notice that resistance is largely useless by comparison to every other stat. Why is this series not done yet? No, I'm sorry. Plus luck buffs Henri's straight sword attack power. That's true. I didn't know resistance was bad, but I kind of left it alone. Figured it was one of those stats that required more player knowledge. I mean, that's totally feasible too. I think everyone's accidentally put a point into resistance and instantly regretted it. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities to waste levels in these games across all of them, right? Not just Dark Souls 1, not just Dark Souls 2, not just Dark Souls 3. All of these games have stat points which are largely sort of like the what you gain out of them is so minuscule after a certain point that you're better off to put it somewhere else. Anyway, let's get back to this video.
So, pay attention to how much leveling costs in DS1. The price increase per level is much lower in DS2 than in the other games. Going from level 114 to 115 costs roughly the same as DS1 charged for going from 54 to 55.
But there is a double whammy of nonsense in Dark Souls 2, and that is the overabundance of souls and thus levels. As long as you play relatively carefully and bank the souls of what you kill while moving slowly and carefully through the game, you will be pushed to cap out all of the stats you actually needed and then sort of splurge on extra stuff.
Context matters.
Context matters. That's rich coming from you, Domo. They can resist a little more, though, Andrew. As a wise Domo once said, you can't argue with someone who just wants to complain. Okay, no, you're not pulling this one. Let's see what he does.
The hard caps in DS2 are much higher than in the other games.
No, they fucking weren't. Every stat stops at 99. That's just a blatant lie. Hard caps are 99, you fuck. Let's go back and listen to this. The fact that you can level up that easily in Dark Souls 2 while convenient breaks the game. It absolutely does, especially when you have bonfire ascetics on top of it. Like, bonfire ascetic farming is crazy.
The stats you actually needed and then sort of splurge on extra stuff.
Context matters. The hard caps in DS2 are much higher than in the other games. In DS2 you were getting 1 point of stamina for every point in endurance, all the way up to level 99. In DS1 there is...
I like how it says context matters and then forgets that the last stamina point gives you 2 extra stamina instead of 1. That's a really useless nitpick, but I thought that was just funny. But this is also one of those things where, like, the level stretching in terms of usefulness goes in different directions. And it is one of those things where I think that, and this is one thing that I will say about Dark Souls 2's stamina by comparison to the other games, is I prefer Dark Souls 2's stamina system where it consistently goes up every time you level it up. I prefer that to the way Dark Souls 1 and 3 handle it, right? Where you sort of hit like a point where it only goes into equip load, or your stamina doesn't go up at all until you hit like a certain amount of levels in endurance by that point. You know, I prefer the Dark Souls 2 stamina system in terms of that sort of leveling up philosophy. You can easily finish your build like halfway through the game and have 99 life gems. Yeah. Yeah, well, again, it's one of those things where they put bonfire ascetics in the game, and they put a ton of bonfire ascetics in the game at the baseline, right? This doesn't include, like, farming them from, like, certain areas or abusing the respawn system or whatever it is. I think at the baseline, without farming at all, you can get 40 bonfire ascetics, right? And when you have bosses like the Rotten that are very easy to get to relatively early in the game and relatively easy to kill, you're talking a bare minimum of 300,000 souls per bonfire ascetic, right? And because I can't do math right now, what would that be? See, 40, I will do it in my head. Fuck a calculator. So it's like 300,000 times 40. That'd be, what? See, like 300,000, see, 3 times 40 would be 120. So that would be, what, like 1.2 million souls from that? Actually, wait, no, maybe like 12 million souls. Yeah, and like you said, Sheep, you can start with a bonfire ascetic. It's like, yeah, that radically imbalances stuff. I mean, if anything, I think that Dark Souls 2 should have had a similar level up system in terms of costs, or should have had more, given how many extra souls you are given in the game. Right? Like, it's crazy. It's crazy how many souls you can gain in that game through very easy means.
Barely any reason to go above 40, unless you need the equip load for Hovel's set. In DS2 you get the 10th spell slot at 75 attunement, and casting speed increases all the way up to level 99.
Okay.
In DS1 there is no reason to go above 50 ATN. In DS2 damage scaling increases all the way up to level 90. In DS casting speed increases all the way up to level 99. In DS1 there is no reason to go above 50 ATN.
Yeah, this is one thing I think that this is part of the reason why discussing this is kind of weird across the 3 games, right? Is because the soft caps and hard caps of each sort of stat are very wonky across the 3 games, right? Like he just mentioned, right? Like I like a lot of the way that the stats in a lot of the other stats in Dark Souls 2 work, where they consistently give you stuff across the entire level range and they don't just stop or radically drop in usefulness after a certain point. And that's one thing that I will give Dark Souls 2 is that like the stats work pretty consistently in terms of giving you stuff that's useful, right? You know, even if we take out the whole ADP thing, like the whole ADP thing fucking with iframes, that still gives you consistent stuff as well. You know, it's like the consistency of the stats is nice, but the problem that Mahler brought up is that you can essentially just the problem that Mahler mentions is that you can essentially overlevel your build without really trying. Right, it's that thing where by completion of the game, you're able to essentially get your build refined, maybe double up on builds, and then splurge on extra stuff as you see fit. Right, it's that thing where it's the imbalancing that's the issue. Right, like you have too many levels in the game. The leveling system itself, I think, is actually pretty good. Right, and better than Dark Souls 1 and 3 in some ways. It's just that it's radically imbalanced because of the fact that you have so many souls to gain. In DS3, I know for sure that you get a whopping 5 extra stamina points at max level. That's the thing with stamina specifically. I'm pretty sure it's a thing where, I'm pretty sure this is correct because I mentioned this in my Dark Souls 3 commentary. Is when you push the endurance stat to 40 in Dark Souls 3, that's basically the most useful range of stamina. Anything over 40, you're going to be wasting a ton of points to get an extra 10 stamina, which is not a lot by the time you hit like 140 or whatever the number is when you hit 40 in terms of the actual skill, right? It's one of those things where that stat is largely useless, right, after the soft cap. And it's like, while having the extra stuff would be helpful, you're wasting so many levels that could go into something else that either increases your damage by a little bit or unlocks new spells or stats, you know, or just provides raw increases of health or FP. You know, it's a very weird thing in Dark Souls 3. Some of the leveling up choices. Mahler always kills the NPC to get the set that gives you 22% more souls, yet he complains that you get too much souls. He doesn't mention that mechanic. I feel like he should if he's going to complain about it. Well, I mean, all the games have gear that lets you increase the soul numbers. That's a fair point. Can't really argue with it. I mean, I am arguing with it. All of the games have gear that lets you increase your soul amounts. And that they only get crazier as they go along. Right? Like, I'm pretty sure Dark Souls 1 had the Mimic Head and the Ring, and I think that was it. I don't remember any other item in Dark Souls 1 that lets you get souls higher than that. I know Dark Souls 2 had the Ring and its variations, as well as different sets of armor that also increase it, like the set that Mahler's wearing, as well as that one piece in the Jester set and stuff like that. You know, and then Dark Souls 3, you can get really crazy with it by having the Mimic Head, the Ring, a shield, and a staff that all increase it. Right? Like it's a thing where the soul value increases get crazier as the trilogy goes on. Like, I don't think there's any denying that. Like, the amount of souls you gain gets crazy when you get up there, especially when you have like certain gear. You know, but I think it is an overall problem in a game where, well, see, the problem ultimately is this. Dark Souls 1 gives you a few items that boost souls gained, right? And then it sort of has its balancing with the level requirements being the way they are, right? Dark Souls 2 has it where it requires less to level up, but you can get even more souls based on things you will find in the game, like different gear sets and bonfire farming, right? Like, even if we take bonfire farming out of the equation, if you play the game consistently well, and you don't die, right? Like if you don't die at all during the entirety of Dark Souls 1, the entirety of Dark Souls 2, the entirety of Dark Souls 3, and you complete each area accordingly without any farming at all, I guarantee you that you are going to be at least like 20 to 50 levels higher in Dark Souls 2 than in the previous games, or than in Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3. You're going to finish the game with more levels simply because there's more stuff in the game that gives you stuff outside of the easy farming methods, right? And farming's always been a thing in these games. It's just the bonfire aesthetic makes farming ridiculously effective, especially when you can kill a boss in 3 minutes and get 300,000 souls for it, right? Or even higher, right? Like one thing I did during my road to not my road to Commander, but one thing I did actually, yeah, it is my road to Commander. I've done too many Dark Souls 2 things, but one thing that I did during my Dark Souls 2 run was refresh the bonfire aesthetic outside of the final boss gauntlet in the end game. And that lets me kill Throne Watcher and Defender and Nashandra, all of which give me souls in varying amounts. And I think you get a solid 700,000 souls by them by the time you hit New Game Plus 7, between the boss souls they give and the souls they drop. So you're talking about a massive amount of souls per one item being used. And that's part of the issue with the bonfire aesthetics in terms of farming, right? If bonfire aesthetics allowed you to refight the boss without gaining or losing anything, I think that would be a different take. But because bonfire aesthetics are plentiful and really easy to use to farm enemies and bosses, that radically imbalances things on top of it, right? Like Dark Souls 1 and 3 have farming spots that are good, but at the end of the day, Dark Souls 2 has the most overclocked farming that you can do with the bonfire aesthetics, on top of soul leveling up costing less. So it's that thing where Dark Souls 1 and 3 are sort of relatively consistent in their balancing, whereas Dark Souls 2 makes it way easier to level up and gives you way more resources to level up. It's a really imbalanced system by comparison to Dark Souls 1 and 3, and Demon Souls as well, right? Like it's radically imbalanced by comparison to what came before, and what came after. That's part of the problem, right? Like if they continued this habit of just overdoing the levels as you went, as the games went on, that would be an issue that wouldn't be unique to Dark Souls 2. But it is an issue unique to Dark Souls 2 because they allow that overclocking very easily. And that's one thing I do want to actually get your guys' opinions on while some of you are here. Is when we do our Dark Souls trilogy run to kind of go through the games, are we going to allow for farming in all three games? And are we going to allow bonfire aesthetic farming in Dark Souls 2? Because I want to go through each game to show how I play through each one and how they each play differently, to sort of wrap up the Domo arc of showing the problems and the pros and the cons between all the different games. So let me know what you think of, should we allow farming in general? Or should we only allow farming based on limited item usage? Or should we not allow farming at all? Let me know. Because I am looking for... It's really weird. All of Domo's videos have really made me want to go back and play Dark Souls 2, along with all the trilogy again, just because. And I haven't played them in a while, so it's going to be kind of fun to go back through them again. All right, let's see. You could just get the easiest weapons and say that game is super easy, yet people choose not to use the easiest weapons. Getting the set requires you to kill an NPC, which most people don't want to do. People choose not to use the easiest weapons. Okay. It's like, yeah, people can get the easiest weapons and some don't just because they prefer them. Getting the set requires you to kill an NPC, which, yeah, but there are also other items that act like that. It's like just that NPC has a very special set. And he's largely an unnecessary NPC unless you want boss gear. So there's that angle to it as well. But I'm pretty sure you can actually find his set elsewhere in the game. I think Mauler probably killed him early to get his set, but I'm pretty sure you can find that set elsewhere in the game as well. Flashback to Vangeris killing the Rotten 40 times in one playthrough with bonfire ascetics. That was fun. Then changing to the final boss run with the 2 bosses. Haha, yeah. He did do that in his commentary vid. LeMayo, he slaughtered the Rotten over and over. Beat you to it, yep. I'm loving DS2 that now killed Ancient Dragon for the first time ever last night. Congrats! I'm glad you killed the Ancient Pain. Love the Ancient Dragon, and the same message should be illegal, Andrew. Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to Domo's video. We keep ranting about stuff. We're already almost an hour into the stream. We've gone 2 minutes. Gone 2 minutes.
In DS2, damage scaling increases all the way up to level 99, and you need higher strength and dexterity than in the other games if you want a power stance. It looks like he just assumed that DS2 has the same hard caps as the other games without even trying to look up what the actual hard caps in this game are.
This is, no, don't unpause it, please, no. Well, this is a problem with Domo's videos. He's using the wrong wording. Because what he's talking about is soft caps, but he keeps saying hard caps. The hard caps are the literal caps. Right? And it's just that thing where Mahler said that you can basically finish up your build and then sploosh on extra stuff. You know, and he's largely right because they give you a ton of resources in the game. Right? Like, for example, you know, if you play a run where you're just a glass cannon, right? You're just using one weapon. Let's just say you're picking the greatsword just for pure example. You can get enough levels in the game just by playing it regularly where you could probably max out stamina and strength. You know, now it's one of those things, if you max out other stats, that's going to take more souls than the game naturally provides without farming. But again, they made farming really easy with the bonfire aesthetic. So it's like, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of a thing where you're not really countering Mahler's argument by saying that the stats are more useful and consistently work. You're kind of just saying that, yeah, the stats are good. That counteracts us having too many souls and too many levels. It's like, that doesn't really, you're talking about the things that are affected by the soul's amount. You're not talking about the soul's amount. DS2, all you need to do for immediate soul gains without that set is just to spend 10k souls with Malencia, and she gives you a silver plus 1 ring for nothing. Yeah. No, let's see. That's why I've never even fought Ancient Dragon before. Lol. It's such a terrible boss. I bet Domo loves it, though. Great sword, best sword? Great sword is best sword. Although the Twin Blade is a close second for me.
In DS1, there is again a hard cap on scaling damage increase.
Bloodborne makes you highly responsible for your choices, and which stat you pursue will likely be the only one you manage to max out during your first playthrough, while in Dark Souls 2 you can usually hit the hard caps of 3 stats without focusing farming of any kind.
Context matters. Bloodborne has way less stats that you need to level up. And is he really
Okay. It's like, talk about a, like, just like, this is a counter, believe me.
arguing that the RPG aspects that feel slapped onto Bloodborne are better than the RPG aspects in DS2 that are much more fleshed out and give you more build variety?
I like how he's just completely missing Mahler's point of, like, in Bloodborne you can usually max out maybe 1 stat on your first playthrough, whereas in Dark Souls 2 you can max out like 3. It's like, that's what Mahler said, and Domo's going on this rant of how Mahler doesn't think the build variety in Dark Souls 2 is the same as in Bloodborne. It's like, that's not what he fucking said. It's like you can't get the Red Iron Twin Blade until the Shrine of Magic spam. That's true. Only place in the game Yorg's Ring would be useful. Yeah, true. I hate that my top 2 favorite weapons is in that area. Yeah. You can't get another Twin Blade earlier, but I can't remember where it is. I think it's in the Lost Bastille somewhere.
Imagine complaining that you get more levels and that you can reset them. He really accuses things of being bad that the community overwhelmingly considers to be fun.
The community overwhelmingly considers to be fun. You mean how Dark Souls 2 is the lowest selling of the trilogy? The lowest selling of every From game since Dark Souls 1 released? That really shows you how much people love Dark Souls 2, isn't it? The fact that so many people don't want to get into it. It's also just tiring for Mauler to say one thing and then him to respond with a completely different point. It gets old, especially by the time we're in video, what is this, like 6, 7?
But of course he doesn't rate games on subjective feelings such as fun, but on his objective feelings that anything in DS2 was bad by default, even if it is a clear improvement to the other games. Even if he does not like being given the choice to reset stats, he could just choose not to reset them. I don't see how more freedom and flexibility is a bad thing.
I find it more fun.
I found it kind of funny how, like, most of his response to Mahler's point was just him going over how, like, just making up responses to Mahler's argument, and then at the very end he's like, I don't think there's an issue with having options. It's like, it's kind of weird how you had that whole preamble that meant nothing. Did you figure out the way to skip the Ruined Sentinels since last week, by the way? I actually did. I was rewatching the streams, and I realized it now. It's that thing where you enter through the No Man's Wharf sort of entrance to the Lost Bastille. You go up the stairs, you go through that area with the dogs and the pursuer that spawns, and then there's a little building with like a wooden walled off area that you can break. You go through there, then you go through a door, then you can go into the building and then find a way up and stuff around that leads you into the area behind the Sentinels. I did remember that upon like spending a couple hours just sitting and steaming my brain, but I did remember it. I did remember it afterwards. That is one of those fuck ups from my previous stream. Is I was pretty sure they were unskippable, but now I have seen the light. I am no longer hollow. I have kindled my fire. Let's see. The same way Dark Souls 2 has the most videos on why it's not that bad, but yeah, sure. Yeah, well, it's really funny how the community sort of agrees that there are problems with Elden Ring, and yet we can't agree on the problems on Dark Souls 2. I think that just kind of shows the divisive nature of Dark Souls 2. I love how easily twist this and turn it back to him. His overwhelmingly positive view of the game completely takes away from DS2 doing things worse than the other Souls games. Yeah. But now we're going to talk about ranged attacks for some reason. This is a long section. We'll see how far we get.
Funny when they can be alerted by the damage other enemies are taking, but you are too far away, so they struggle to decide whether to do anything about it.
Was this simple?
This is one of those funny things. Yeah, that was one of those funny clips where I liked the text showing up there. I want to see the text again.
I find it more funny when they can be alerted by the damage other enemies are taking, but you are too far away, so they struggle to decide whether to do anything about it.
Was this simply the first time he ever used a bow in a Souls game? He really likes to portray things that work the same in every Souls game as issues that are unique to DS2. He could have at least tried to snipe enemies in the other games, but I can't.
Hold on a minute, Domo. Hold on a minute. I'm very suspicious of this clip, right? Because I've tried sniping, because I've sniped these guys before. I've never had them not aggro to me after sniping them. Is Domo fucking with this clip? Is Domo fucking with this AI? Because I've never had the enemy get shot and then not move towards me immediately. Right? Am I having a moment, or is this like, is Domo fucking with the AI here? I don't know. You calling him a liar? Not very charitable. It's like, yeah, I am calling him a liar because he has lied about stuff in the previous, see the previous streams. I mean, it's also not very charitable of me to hold him accountable when he doesn't respond to Mahler's points, when he just makes up an argument about something Mahler didn't say. See, Dark Souls 3 does this as well with the Sorcery Merchant. It's very, very dumb. Yeah. DS2 gave crossbows a crosshair. One of my pros over DS1 made them useless unless you can lock on. Yeah, all ranged weapons should have a range, like, aiming function. They should not require lock on. See, Andrew, it's happening. He hasn't, though, but go off. I mean, this is one thing. I've shot these guys before, and they've come after me, so I've not experienced what he's experiencing, so I'm not going to trust him. Especially when we're both doing essentially the same thing. I don't know if he's out of the aggro range or what, but I've not had this issue with these guys happen to me personally.
Guess doing a basic amount of research isn't needed for an objective review why DS2
Wait, no, see, look, there he
was
goes.
the worst game.
He's coming to attack. It's like the spellcaster wasn't doing shit.
I find it more funny when they can be alerted by the damage other enemies are taking, but you
Oh wait, no, they are trying to like do an attack. This is one of those things though where it's like, yeah, this is a thing I will give Domo. This is a problem in other games too.
are too far away, so they struggle to
See, believe it or not, I will give credit when credit is due.
decide whether to do anything about it.
Was this simply the first time he ever used a bow in a Souls game? He really likes to portray things that work the same in every Souls game as issues that are unique to DS2. He could have at least tried to snipe enemies in the other games, but I guess doing a basic amount of research isn't needed for an objective review why DS2 was the worst game.
Why are we showing this?
Sometimes enemies don't even react.
Wow, Mauler lying? No, Domo lying, not Mauler. It would help digest Domo's takes more if his script wasn't extremely snobby. Well, I mean, it would also help if he played Mauler's clips in their entirety instead of just picking in. Like, this is the problem with Domo's series overall. Is like whether you believe Domo's points are honest and in good faith or not, he is cherry picking very specific things from Mauler's videos and then responding to them. He's not giving a wider context to these clips. He's just putting a little clip in and then responding to it. This is part of the reason why I don't like this style of response series, because you're just picking and choosing random little clips to react to as opposed to reacting to the entire thing in full. This is part of the reason why I like EFAP so much, is they will watch the entire video, right? And I try to do that too because it's good for the series as a whole when you can react to the entire thing front to back, right? Because it shows that you've given it a fair chance across the entire video series or video or whatever. Domo's been picking and choosing very specific parts of Mauler's videos to react to, right? Which makes me think on the offhand that he doesn't want to deal with everything Mauler said because some of it might not be good for his own argumentation, right? It's that thing where it makes me think that Domo's picking and choosing his targets as opposed to dealing with the entire army that's before him, which is essentially what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to react to everything Domo said. And Domo has made some good points here and there, right? And this is a point in Domo's favor with like the AI not reacting to sniping them sometimes. You know, this is a point in Domo's favor. I'm not going to hide that. I'm not going to go against it just because I think that Mauler made some good points about Dark Souls 2 having issues, right? This is not a thing where I'm purposely trying to go out of my way to make all these other games look better or worse. All right, so let's see. We're Team Mauler here, defending him against a defense of his defense of H. Bomber Guy's defense of a game he played. Completely Inception with these streams. Yes, it is. Mauler's tone is often extremely condescending. No, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, Mauler has a lot of points that counteract things. I think it's fair to be smug when you've counteracted an argument that is complete bullshit. I think part of the problem with this, too, is just the AI voice makes it kind of weird. I can't wait for someone to defend Vangeris' defense against Domo's defense, against Mauler's defense, against H. Bomber Guy's defense against... yeah, just... We're getting to that point where we're going to have, like... I forgot. How many levels of hell are there? Are there 7 levels of hell? 9 levels of hell? Which one are we in right now? You should have spent 20 hours critiquing Mauler's 10-hour series. Haha. I mean, it would do good for him. It'd be room for more ads in his videos, more videos in general, more content to react to and to critique. I mean, it would also go a long way for showing that you're taking the entire thing sort of on good faith as opposed in good faith. And the best way to show someone to counteract someone's argument is to show their argument in its entirety, and then break it down and then talk about it, right? As opposed to just cherry picking specific things you want to react to. It's that weird thing of where he doesn't, I'm pretty sure Domo series is shorter than Mahler's entire series, and Mahler makes a lot of points in his Dark Souls response series. He makes a lot of points, right? And Domo could have, gone through them, but he didn't, because I personally think he's an irrational fan of Dark Souls 2, right? I think he's one of the people that just cannot understand why people criticize the game, and I think that's a that's a problem. The fact that people can't understand why we criticize Dark Souls 2 is largely the problem. Dark Souls 2 has issues. Dark Souls 1 and 3 also have issues. All of the games have issues. Dark Souls 2 has a lot of issues that the other games don't have. Let's see, where are we at? Let's see, Muller literally went through H. Bomber Guy's video line for line with helpful visuals. That's also true. Let's see, it's tolerable when you're right, but rarely does Domo say something that I agree with and believe isn't him manipulating. That's fair. He's Welsh, using an English accent can get him coming across condescending. Perks me up whenever Critical Drinker shows up on EFAP. I actually enjoy the pod. They two go together with me for Mediacrism. Yeah, I love Open Bar. Yeah, I feel like it's like watching TV in a way where it's like every Tuesday I've got Real BBC, every Thursday we've got Open Bar, every Friday we've got Friday Night Tights, and then every Saturday we get EFAP. It's a great little, it's like watching TV again, but it's longer and less sanitized. It's great. The drinker represents us Scottish people with his accent. He does. Believe that. All right. Doesn't help that Domo takes all rational criticisms of the game like ADP and calls it complaining. Everything can't be complaining. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where even if it is just complaining, the fact that so many people complained about Dark Souls 2 should give an indication that something is wrong, right? Like by comparison of all the other games, something should be wrong when you look at all the complaining of Dark Souls 2 by comparison to the complaining of the other games. Thursday's Open Bar was class. I need to finish it. I started it, but I haven't finished it. I need to catch up. This is the one thing. I really hope a lot of these ranged attack clips are just him showing clips. That way we can get through this video faster. Not a bad impression there, Van Garis. I try. Little fun fact. My family is a quarter English, a quarter German, a quarter Scottish, and a quarter Irish. And none of us drink. I found that to be a hilarious genealogy sort of joke. When you're trying to persuade others, being condescending isn't something you want to do. That's why H. Bomber Guy and his ilk are so obnoxious, constant smugness and condescension. Well, this is one thing where I think condescension can help sort of prove a point when it's demonstratively wrong. I think it's part of the thing. It's essentially the same as my reaction to some clips in different videos I've reacted to, where it's like someone says something and I'm just like, what the fuck, that's totally wrong. It's essentially the same as that, but in a scripted sort of format. And it's one of those things, I think there is a charm to being a little smug here and there. It does sort of depend on how right you think you are as well. But again, it's one of those things where smugness often comes down to, are you actually correct or not? And sometimes it seems like a lot of people that are smug are often not correct. But again, we could argue about smugness all day, but at the end of the day, it's about the points, not the way you say it. Oh, also, as one of your Sekiro streams didn't disapprove of this accent as you were worried about how it might come across. Oh, you talk about the Japanese accent I did? The really racist one? That was fun. I think that's fair. That's why it super sucks that Domo is the exact same way. DS2 does need a defense, and this one is shit in my opinion. There's one thing, to put it out there. I actually consider doing an actual defense of Dark Souls 2, where I actually go over like different things that I think are praiseworthy in the game, or at the very least could be seen as a positive. I've thought about doing that, just as kind of a random aside. I thought about doing it. I thought it might be kind of fun. It'd also be really funny to show that after my super long Dark Souls 2 video where I critiqued a lot of it. That would be fun. But that would probably not come out for a long time just because I've got so much else to do. Oh, it's just simple clips.
And for some weird reason, one enemy being aggroed doesn't alert others to your presence. In fact, they can get in each other's way.
The store is straight sword, they pretty much just one-shot her.
Look at this.
And
The one in DS2 at least managed to move the enemies out of the way. This one here in DS1 is just stuck completely.
Wait, the one in DS2 managed to move the enemies out of the way. What are you talking about?
Get in each other's way.
the store is straight sword, they pretty much just one-shot her.
Look at this.
And
The one in DS.
Okay, like I was supposed to, that clip almost ended. All right. I said it before and I'll say it again. Just a simple, I see where people are coming from, or I haven't had this happen, but it can, goes a long way. Yeah, that's true. Mahler did defend it. It's the first 10 minutes of his final vid in the series. You just don't watch the other hour and 15 minutes. Yeah, that's true. If you did a defense, I guarantee it'd be great because you're way more rational. A balance of defense and critique is sorely missing. I will agree on the last part. The balance of critique and defense is a problem. And also just people seem to think that hate is criticism a lot nowadays, and it's not. It's just people hate arguing for some reason, and yet they'll argue about hating arguing. It's the weirdest shit in the modern age. And yeah, Mahler's defense of the game is pretty cool at the beginning, but I thought about doing my own take on it. I'll just kind of see it, where we line up and where we differ, but either way. It might be a thing. I don't want to commit to it just because it would be a video that would come out way after anything else I'm doing.
DS2 at least managed to move the enemies out of the way. This one here in DS1 is just stuck completely.
I've played a lot of Dark Souls 1 and 3.
I'm really starting to question.
This is one of those things where I'm going to ask, take a shot every time he includes that Fortia clip. Take a shot. I don't drink, but one of you is bound to drink somewhere. Take a shot every time the Fortia clip shows up.
That claim. If he actually played a lot of DS1 and 3, he could have told Waller that most of the things he complains about are the exact same in every Souls game.
Well, this is also one thing, too, where just because you play a lot of the game doesn't mean that you're going to test every possible way to do every single thing in the game. I mean, like, part of the fun of playing the games is the variety of what you can do, but part of the fun is also just because the mechanics can be really engaging. This just seems like a really weird way to sort of just say, your friend should have actually known all of these facts that I know. Push his glasses up on nose.
Using a bow to thin out groups of enemies has always worked, but somehow Mahler presents it as an inherent flaw if you can do the same in DS2.
I mean, I would say that some of the clips of Mahler showing the range attacks, I think is sort of an example of certain things where ranged attacks are going to be preferable to running up and dealing with the enemies. Like here, you can run up and slap most of these little shits in like 1 or 2 hits, even with really weak weapons, right? Like you don't need to like stand back and snipe all these guys. It's also a sort of unfair comparison to begin with because we went over Shrine of Amana, which is a very late game area in Dark Souls 2, with spellcasters that can attack you from very far ranges away, right? That's already an encounter where ranged is probably going to be better than trying to run up to them and getting ganked by all the different enemies in the water, right? Then you show an area with big demons, which is a late game area, which works, but again, they don't shoot at you. Then you got the Valley of Drakes enemies, which are sort of mid-game areas that, again, don't shoot at you. Then you did a mid-game area in Dark Souls 1 again. Then you did this super early game area in Dark Souls 3, so I don't honestly understand if you understand the context around the clip Mahler's showing. As well as the fact that you didn't show, as well as the fact that you're picking and choosing specific clips from Mahler's runs. I would say that it'd be more common to reach that viewpoint because DS2 heavily incentivizes bows. It's not nearly as encouraged in Dark Souls 1 or 3. Yeah. Well, this is one thing that I think that Dark Souls 2 got right that Dark Souls 3 got wrong was having the same sort of arrow system as Dark Souls 1 did. One thing I really hate and will hold forever against Dark Souls 3 is how they fucked up bow builds by limiting the amount of arrows you can have to 99. I hate that restriction so much. It's such a dumb restriction by comparison to 999 from the previous games. It's such a fuck you developer moment on DS3's part. And one thing that I think is kind of interesting about Dark Souls 2 is that the bows in Dark Souls 2 can be the most overpowered in any Souls game because you have 999 arrow capacity on top of really overpowered poison arrows, on top of being able to buy several arrow types from different people in large quantities, right? You can have a stacked archery build in Dark Souls 2 if you really want it, to the point of being overpowered. And it's one of those things that I think really does change the way the game works. I mean, just like just watch any clip that I've done of the DLCs of Dark Souls 2, and you'll see I use a lot of poison arrows because they are so easy to get, so effective at dealing with enemies, and they are such a great way to counteract a lot of bullshit that you'll encounter in different situations. It's crazy how overpowered the poison arrows are in Dark Souls 2, especially when you can get like 1,000 of them. Another thing, when I caught up on last week's stream, pretty sure Domo said the Shrine of Magic spam was still early game, had to do rewind to check. Oh, yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, what? Like, what counts as late game then? You may as well say Millennia is early game Elden Ring at that point. Yeah, that was some nonsense, and Elden Ring made it worse. Yeah, especially when enemies can auto-dodge. They've fucked bow builds a lot for no reason. Like, really no reason at all. It feels like they're trying to counteract this thing where you just snipe enemies from out of their aggro range. But instead of making the enemies react to you, which would have been a great fix across any of the games, it is just pathetic that they just decided to make bow builds less effective.
As usual, the enemy only aggroes if I enter his aggro range.
This is actually a thing that I just considered with this. There are several encounters in Dark Souls 2 that you can trigger a large group by shooting one of them. And that can become a problem. See the little roly-poly enemies in the Frozen DLC to see what I mean. If you shoot some of them, they will activate other ones around them, which is good from an AI perspective, but also bad because you essentially initiate a gank when you're not in position to get ganked. DS2 was peak for crossbow, only sad thing is no poison bolts exist. I know. For shame, From Software. Give us more poison.
These don't even know what to do. They just drop their aggro a few seconds after getting shot, which I don't want to use as an argument against DS3 as I can reproduce it in the other Souls games as well. I'm in the line of sight of his buddy, and not even far away, and yet he still does not react. This bridge is always a good source of pathfinding issues.
Well, considering I have about 600 hours in Dark Souls 3, I've never seen this enemy get stuck here. So I'm just going to say you found a glitch. Like, you found a bug that happens rarely, so have fun with that.
That was too scary for the dog.
This is one random point I will bring up. From Software has only ever made one good dog enemy, and that's Sith. Every other dog enemy in the Dark Souls trilogy, in Bloodborne, in Elden Ring, I will stand by this. All the rest of them fucking suck. I hate them so much. They just suck. They just circle around you all the time. in like later games, and they're just annoying as hell, just across the board. For fuck's sake, DS3 having the same issue means it wasn't fixed, not that it was good in DS2 or not an issue. I'm sick of him with that wank argument. Yeah. I mean, again, this is that thing, too, where we just kind of have to assume from Mahler's clips. This is the problem, right? If Domo put a clip of Mahler saying none of the other games deal with this issue and then put these clips in, that would be an actual like counter-argument to Mahler's points, right? If Mahler said these issues do not exist and then Domo showed a lot of examples of them existing in other games, that would be a counter-argument. The problem is, a lot of Mahler's clips just show something weird happening in Dark Souls 2, and then he recreates it, right? It's a thing where he shows they exist in other games, which means that other games have the same problems as Dark Souls 2. So at the very baseline, it puts them on the same level. Right? It doesn't actually make Dark Souls 2 any better or worse. It puts them all on the same level when they all have the same issues. The dogs are terrible enemies. Sif was a good girl. Every other dog is shit. That's one thing I forgot. Is Sif a boy or a girl? I always thought Sif was a boy. I don't know. Complete agree. Sif is the best doggo up there with Rags. You forgot to type it. You need to type Rags properly. Ragiz.
The one with the lantern just forgot what he was doing.
Sif is a girl. I never considered that one way or the other. I guess it makes sense. Isn't Sif a female name from Norse mythology? Or like Norse something? Like Norse culture?
If this happened in DS2, he would complain about the hitbox. Not even enemies with ranged attacks realize that they should help their friend by attacking me.
Next up we have the increase in stagger time on the headshots, which is just a weird and frustrating change. But on top of that, the enemies in this game seem hell-bent on hitting you in between the eyes.
Seems like it's Senna for a sec. Whoa!
I'm not denying that the stagger time got increased, as it really seems to be like 50% longer. But I don't...
This is one thing. He's going to breeze past the fact that it stuns you for so long. Yeah, I think Sif was married to Thor. I don't know. I mean, I don't know either. Just I've heard Sif is a feminine name, but I never caught on to it in Dark Souls 1. It's not given in canon or any lore in the game, but presumed to be female. Yeah. I guess because it is, I guess, like a feminine Norse name, I guess it would count. It's sort of implied. Implied, I guess.
Don't see how they are hellbent on hitting your head. They aim at your chest and getting hit in the head happens during specific scenarios. I will show those scenarios soon, but first here are 3 fun clips of enemies jumping down. Walking towards them if they are above you can get you hit in the head. And you can also get hit in the head if you were doing an attack where you duck. In DS2, there are also helmets that prevent headshots.
I'm sorry, but a helmet preventing a headshot should not affect it when you get hit by a giant fucking iron bar to the face. Something should happen, man. You have wings, use them. Yeah.
Wow. Frame perfect stagger.
This was not a headshot stagger. He is running around without armor and a slow weapon, and willingly decided to just get attacked by those extremely telegraphed spells by being greedy. This is just yet another moment where he blames the game for his own skill issues.
I mean, I actually have to wonder though. Like most spells like this in the game don't activate like this, so he could have just been misled on his. Because I'm pretty sure that's Fortia's first playthrough of Dark Souls 2 that Mahler took clips from. Right, so I think this is a case of Fortia didn't know that they activated that quickly. Right, I don't think it's really a thing of... I don't think it's a thing of Fortia, making a bad choice as much as he didn't know that they attack, like, very quickly.
Enemies might randomly decide to shoot directly into the sky for lack of a better target.
This also happens in DS1 if enemies lose their focus while preparing to shoot. I couldn't reproduce it in DS3, but I noticed something else.
Yeah, this one area is bad for projectiles going through the floor for some reason. I have no idea why I've only encountered it in this one spot, so I have no idea what the issue is here. But yeah. We're almost done with this. We're about to get to skyboxes, which will be a short thing, thankfully.
Like, the crows in Huntsman's Cops. What in the f*** is this 5-year-old's attempt?
Who even zooms into the background while playing? I always liked how beautiful this skybox looks.
I love the beautiful skybox of the twitchy birds flying around. I love the twitchy birds. Yay. Dark Souls too good.
And if I would apply the same amount of nitpicking to the other games, I could also complain that half the birds in DS3 fly backwards and that they phase through buildings.
I mean, I'd say the Dark Souls 2 and 3 have the same birds. They're just shit.
Or we can just accept that we do not need to waste valuable computing resources on background decoration.
Wait, so did Domo just make an argument in favor of getting rid of something he enjoyed from the game? Because he said he enjoyed the skybox, but he wants us to get rid of the thing in the skybox. It's kind of odd.
Skyboxes had some jank in DS1 as well. The point is that if you just want to complain, you can always look for artificial reasons to do so.
It's like, look, every game has problems. Look, every game is unfinished. Look at it. I want you to look at it. Mahler said that Dark Souls is a masterpiece with some faults, and Dark Souls 3 hitboxes are downright satisfying to watch. He clearly doesn't think these issues are prevalent in the other games. I mean, just because a couple of them exist doesn't mean that, like, they aren't... Another problem with this is that Dark Souls 2 has a lot of problems that are magnified, right? Because they happen so often. And that's a big difference, right? None of these games are perfect, right? And you'll never hear me say any of these games are perfect, right? But it's that thing where a lot of the problems in the other games are ultra pronounced in Dark Souls 2 because of the laziness and the way things were cobbled together, right? And this is one thing too. Like, this is as much a problem with From Software in general as well as the B team that worked on Dark Souls 2. They really should not have split development on Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne. They really should not have done that. I think both games are worse for wear because of it. And personally, I think both games would have been a lot better if they had focused on one and then done the other afterward as an entire team as opposed to splitting it. I think splitting it just wastes time and resources, and we end up with the black sheep of the Souls series. Right? It's kind of interesting that the Dark Souls 2 game, by comparison to the other games, is the one that's arguably one of the most divisive ones they've made when it was made by an almost entirely different team. It's very strange how that is. It's very odd. It's very odd how Dark Souls 2 is the weird one. It's like, yeah, all these like skybox issues and different things, yeah, those are issues. Right? It's like all those games have issues. But in terms of quantity, Dark Souls 2 has a lot more of them.
lack of understanding of damage or danger, but we know these creatures don't want to die. Hell, some of them have shields and wince upon being hit.
Is he now really acting as if luring enemies down cliffs or into fire is somehow an issue if it happens in DS2, even though it works in every Souls game?
Again, amount. The amount of enemies that don't give a shit and just do stupid shit.
Before I move on, here is some more board jank that Mauler would complain about if it happened in DS2.
What? What was that last little comment?
Before I move on, here is some more board jank that Mauler would complain about if it happened in DS2.
Okay. This is one of those things too where, like, if you notice, like, the AI are in positions that they are not normally in. Like, you have to lure the AI into this corner. This AI doesn't exist in this corner. It's like the fact that it still gets stuck is a problem, but it's one of those things where Domo's kind of going out of his way to fuck with the AI in different ways.
Here are a few cheese tactics that I used on my first playthrough.
This seems like a strange skill issue, doesn't it, Domo? The Gwyn set just doesn't hit the fashion for me. Not for me either. I wish it was, like, more flamey. That would have been cool. Come on, man, LeMayo, you gotta admit that he is hyper-focusing some of these. Why would you risk being up there where you could get pinned? That's also true. Hey, at least be thankful these clips go on and we don't have to deal with him talking. I really hope he's not just going to show these for the next, like, 2 minutes. It's going to be kind of boring to react to.
The Black Knights on the way to Gwyn were also always fun to cheese. And let us not forget about all the fun you can have in Sense Fortress.
He's super forcing these. You don't need to force many gravity deaths in DS2. I'd agree with that. This is my favorite cheese for Dark Souls 3 and the Road of Sacrifice. I just stay on the ladder and the NPCs drop to their death. I think those snakes are trying to mate up there. But yeah,
They live here.
This is an AI problem across all the games, right? Everything's super baitable. Like, they've not fixed the AI self-preservation in any of their games, right? It's just one of those funny things where, you know, like, one of the clips that Mahler showed, right, was, like, Dragon Rider, like, randomly just walking off the edge for no reason. I'm trying to go back to that without losing all of it. That's baitable.
Lack of understanding of damage or danger, but we know
these enemies are doing something extra dumb because they're trying to attack through a wall that has spikes on it. It's like, this is just blatantly stupid, right? Like, it's not like their pathing is totally screwed up. It's like, there is a doorway over here. I don't know if it's open or not, but it could be, you know, openable. It's just weird. Oh, so he's going to criticize this area for the enemies being susceptible to the environment, but Iron Keep gets a pass. Well, remember, Iron Keep is untrustworthy, so we need to trust the untrustworthiness. But yeah, it's just things really. He's showing a bunch of things. Like, look at all the things that all the games suffer from, instead of showing the things that the games do right.
They live here. Shouldn't they know better? I always wondered if him running away is just a pathing issue or an intended way to trick us into going down to the Titanite demons.
The Alon Knights live in Iron Keep. Shouldn't they stand on less dangerous platforms? That would help. See, the Xanthos Hat Girl, I don't know her name, but she invades with a Hazel pick. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a problem. This is the thing that we've kind of noticed as this series has gone on, right? Is a lot of his response series to Mahler usually ends up boiling down to, most of the time, not all the time, but most of it ends up being all the games have these issues, which is one of those things where all the games have the same sort of baseline, right? You know, so at the end of the day, you have to peel back the layers and be like, okay, why does Dark Souls 2 have the reputation it has then? Like, if all the games are the same, what's the difference, right? And he's not really going over a lot of differences as much as similarities. So it's one of those things of where if you are responding to Mahler's critique of the game, I'd be curious to see what Domo thinks of Dark Souls 2 in totality if he was not responding to anybody, right? I would be curious to see what he thinks are good and bad in the game overall.
I've played a lot of Dark Souls 1 and 3.
Take a shot.
I really fail to see how AI suicide is worse in DS2.
How many times have you had the AI just roll off a cliff and die while fighting them? Usually they're trying to kill me.
The Pharos lockstones that open up about as many trapdoors as they do real ones.
Did he not even try to understand the rat-themed PvP dungeons?
The rat-themed PvP dungeon that doesn't give you anything in the regular game, which can happen a lot if you're not doing PvP. Wonderful. This lockstone shit is probably the worst case of making the most annoying illusory wall type shit ever. You know, not specifically with these, but like with you have to use the lock. You have to use a key on something to find an invisible wall that you couldn't have broken through unless you already had the key in the first place. So why have the keyhole for an illusory wall if it's just an illusory wall to begin with? What's the fucking point, right? Like, I hate these lockstone things in relation to invisible walls. Here, I think there's a little bit more of a defense of it because they do things in the environment. But at the same time, it's like, what the fuck, man? Why did you fuck up so many things from previous games and just change them just because?
insolent fools line up to trample upon our burrows. I know thy kind, base plotters and schemers all. Put these contraptions to thy employ against thy foe.
If you are in the Rat King Covenant, the enemies here are on your side.
Isn't this that area where you spawn in as a victim that gets ganked by poison rats and a player in slow-moving water? Yeah, this is that place. I accidentally rolled off the cliff last night going for the ladder in Things Betwixt because my run jump got stuck. Instead of unsticking it, the game read it as another input, so I rolled off. Yeah. That's just one of those things where it's like, well, when the game is feeling like it, we suffer.
While wearing the Covenant ring and being in one of the 2 rat-themed PvP areas, you can pull players that enter these areas into your world as invaders. You can upgrade your PvP dungeon to make it harder for the people you pull in. It is a really great feature, but Mahler still manages to present it as a negative just because he did not even pay any attention what this area is actually.
This is a point we made in some previous part where it's like, Mahler didn't understand the extremely niche applications of these items that we've been trained to use throughout the entire game up to this point to unlock items and progression. Why did Mahler know this extremely niche way to do something for an extremely niche covenant in a single area of the game when the entire game has been telling us, hey, use these little lockstones to unlock shit because you'll want stuff behind them? Why didn't Mahler use the niche thing that's only usable in this one area for a niche thing? Why didn't Mahler use these stones that are, limited to a very specific amount that open a lot of doors that are fucking useless unless you're in the Covenant doing PvP specific shit? Makes me wonder. Just because you can use it for one thing doesn't mean that it's useful when the rest of the game tells you that you can use these for different effects that are useful.
About.
There is the total bonfire teleportation from the get-go, which is bloody disappointing in that it likely tied itself to the world being linear once again, though less so in Dark Souls 3.
English is not my first language, so I might have gotten that wrong, but did he really claim that DS2 was more linear than the other Souls games?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. I've made entire charts going over how linear Dark Souls 2 is by comparison to Dark Souls 1 and 3. Now, Dark Souls 3 is more linear in terms of how you progress through the game by comparison to Dark Souls 1 and 2, right? Dark Souls 3 is more linear than Dark Souls 2 and 1, but Dark Souls 2 is also much more linear than Dark Souls 2 is much more linear than Dark Souls 1. With all the hours I've spent on DS2, anyone saying skill issue can say it to the back of my hand. I only enter the Covenant to avoid the enemies if I decide the Rat Authority is worth my time. I don't even bother. I just kill everything because it makes me mad, and it's just like, fuck you, I can knock you down in like 3 hits anyway.
So in DS1 you have to defeat the gargoyles and ring the first bell.
Here we go. This is where he's starting to do that thing. He's starting to do that thing where he says, this game is linear because the objectives have to be taken in a specific order, whereas Dark Souls 2 lets you go to multiple locations, and then it allows you to progress the game. I bet he's going to do that. He's going to take the objectives in Dark Souls 1, compare it to the way that you unlock areas in Dark Souls 2, compare the two when they're not the same, and then say that this is just a invalid criticism. Watch it happen. Watch it happen. Take another shot if I end up being correct in what he's about to argue.
Then you have to defeat Quelag and ring the second bell, although you could do that in any order you like. There are a few optional enemies on the way, like Capra Demon, but generally there are a lot of bosses you have to defeat.
I like how this is just him throwing in other points in the middle of his talk about linearity. It only serves to distract from the linearity, man.
Then you need to go through Sen's Fortress.
This section is going to be very easy to get through because he shows a lot of clips about just sort of nothing that deals with linearity here. So I think we're in luck to finish this very soon.
Afterwards, you have to defeat O and S. And then you have to fight the 4 old ones in any order. It is a bit non-linear, but really not all that much compared to DS2.
This is one of those things where it really comes down to like the definitions of things, right? Because when you say linearity, are you talking about the way the levels work or the way the objectives work? Because those are very different things.
Before I continue comparing the linearity in Souls games, let us take a look at how the lack of teleportation can play out in the worst case. Imagine you accidentally went all the way down Ash Lake early and had to walk back out again. It can easily take 15 minutes before you are back at Firelink Shrine. Not having teleport is really not that great for players that do not have...
Hold on a minute, what the fuck? Let's go back to this.
Imagine you accidentally went all the way down Ash Lake early and had to walk back out again. It can easily take 15 minutes before you are back at Firelink Shrine. Not having...
Why would you be going back to Firelink fucking Shrine? You've got 2 other bonfires before you even get to this place. Right? One of them is in Blighttown at the bottom near the little sewer area. Another could be at Quelaag if you've beaten her. Why the... You at least should be able to find one of those bonfires before you go to this place. Why the fuck are you stretching this as far as possible?
Teleport is really not that great for players that do not have the time to always run across half the map to visit certain merchants or blacksmiths either. It was a fun gimmick to show off the interconnectivity that is present in the first quarter of the game, but it is really annoying on repeat playthroughs.
Well, just don't do it in that order then. Like, there's no real reason to go down to Ash Lake unless you really need something from that area. Like if you really want to get that dragon weapon. It's like you can completely skip that until you're ready to go down that way. It's just weird. If you haven't gotten the Lord Vessel, yes, I know, right? Like, but it's that thing is like, why would you go down there? Like, you get a bunch of upgrade materials you either A, can't use yet, along with a pathway that doesn't really lead to anything unless you want to be a part of that covenant with the dragon, or if you want to get the dragon's, like, thing. It's like, if you haven't gotten the Lord Vessel by mistake, like, you wander down there by mistake. It's like, yeah, you can go down there. But I mean, again, it's like, it's a one-time thing. If you're this is the thing. First-time runs are important, but it's about replay value as well. Once you realize that you don't need a lot of shit from down there until later on in the game, you can just skip that area and go back down when you have warping. Right? And I mean, like, the bonfire from the beginning of Ash Lake up through the little tree thing and then back out into Blighttown, it's not that long, especially when you don't have that many enemies to fight with to begin with until you actually get back to Blighttown. Let's see. You should have shown more of Bed of Chaos so we can skill issue him. Yes. If you take strictly needed to get the credits, DS2 is fully linear since you don't even need to kill any Lord Souls if you just farm your soul memory to get through Shrine of Winter. I mean, again, that's sort of half right, because the base game lets you just farm souls until you get to Drangleic Castle, but in Scholar, you do actually have to kill the old ones, right? So, Scholar fixed an issue, but at the same time, it's still confusing because we have 2 different fucking versions of the game. It's really weird. First quarter, what the fuck? Up to the Lord Vessel is like half the game. I mean, literally, it's actually, you could argue that it's upwards of half. You know, maybe like 2/3 even. In terms of like objectives. But again, it's just that thing where he's talking about objectives, not really the way levels are interconnected, which is where I would say the linearity comes into play in terms of what is and is not linear.
In my opinion, it heavily lowers the replay value of DS1. I will keep it short for DS3, as everyone that has ever played it knows that it is a pretty linear route of progression. You start in the High Wall of Lothric, then go through the Undead Settlement, down the Road of Sacrifices and into Farron Keep. From there you go down the Catacombs and then Irithyll Valley, and so on. It's always the same main areas in the same order.
No, it's not. It's not always the same order. Yeah, you have to do things to progress, like in a specific order, but like it's not the same order every time. You can go through Farron Keep or Cathedral of the Deep and then progress through the Catacombs. But once you get to Irithyll, you need to go through both. In order to get to Irithyll and go through Irithyll, you need to go through Farron Keep. You need to go through Farron Keep and Cathedral of the Deep, right? The pathway is open, but you have to end up doing both. This is your wording's very poor here. Why doesn't he apply the first-time player example to Dark Souls 2 as well? Yeah, I've never had that in Scholar. Lets me through the shrine without all. It does? The wiki for Scholar must be broken then, because the wiki for Scholar said that it was that you do need to defeat all the 4 old ones to open the path. I don't know. We'll see what happens on our next run through the game. I'm gonna play Scholar just for extra shits and giggles. Let's see. He missed the cathedral. He did, but I mentioned it now.
There are some optional areas you can visit, like Smoldering Lake or the Cathedral of the Deep.
Cathedral of the Deep is optional. Dude, you are just straight fucking wrong at this point. You have clearly not played DS3. You need the doll in Cathedral of the Deep to get through Irithyll. Which wiki do you use? I use the Fextralife one. That's the one I use. And most of the time it's been right. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed something, or maybe they updated it. I don't know.
There are a few optional bosses you can fight, like the Curse-Rotted Greatwood. You can fight the Dancer early to gain earlier access to the castle, but it is still undeniably the most...
Why is he slowing down that grab when it clearly went over him?
The Dancer early to gain earlier access to the castle, but it is still undeniably the...
So that hand clearly went through his face. To quote him from earlier. Head. The
most linear Souls game. In DS2 you have to obtain the 4 Old Souls, which typically begins with Lost Sinner, but you can do them in any order you like. You can reach Lost Bastille either through the Forest of Fallen Giants or No Man's Wharf.
This is the one thing, dude. Rebalance your audio. Holy shit. Like, I can hardly hear you over the game being so fucking loud.
But you can also skip all the bosses in the early game by gathering enough souls to open the Shrine of Winter Gate.
Wait, so is... Okay, I'm curious now. I gotta check this out. Hold on 1 second. Let me check something real quick. Let's see, I'm looking up the wiki for Dark Souls 2. Scholar version. Let's see here. Where is... Blah, 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 blah. Trying to find the progression. See if I can look up Shrine of Winter here. Shrine of Winter. It's funny that wolf that attacks you can't get through into Irithyll. It's funny cheese. I only do it a few times when I want to spice it up, but it is so great. I bet we have time for one more vid. No, we don't. The next video is 42 minutes long. We're not gonna make it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I guess both options are available. Okay. So you can get the 4 souls and it opens if you don't have 1,000,000 souls, but if you do have 1,000,000 souls, you can bypass it. Okay. Okay, I just wanted to double check the wiki there just to see. They've got it labeled really oddly where it's like one chunk of information, then the next chunk of information, so I guess I misread it at some point. Let me bring this back up here. Alright, but we're about done. Sorry, sheep. Next time. Next time.
Afterwards, there are a few bosses in a linear order, but generally I would argue that it is the least linear Souls game.
It is the least linear Souls game. I like how he's not talking about like maps at all. He's talking about like progression in terms of what's required.
Especially as you have so much choice in which order you
Dude, turn the game volume down. Holy fuck, I can hardly hear you.
tackle the bosses, and as the vast majority of them are optional. You have 10 potential first bosses and only 8 out of the 42 bosses are mandatory. In subsequent playthroughs or New Game Plus you can try different routes and this gives it a lot more replay value. So I seriously hope that I misunderstood Mahler as I don't understand how he could unironically argue that DS2 is the most linear Souls game. I also do not understand how teleporting would tie itself to the world being linear, as teleporting encourages non-linear exploration.
Okay, well, in case you couldn't hear that because of the stupid fucking game being ridiculously loud, he was talking about he hopes he misunderstood Mahler, which he obviously did considering how linear the game can get. Going to fact check his 10 potential first bosses. Feel that's incorrect. Well, I mean, we could do it a freehand pretty much. So you've got Dragon Rider, the old Dragon Slayer. You've got the... Let's see here. You got those two. You've got the Pursuer. You've got the Last Giant. Then you've got Skeleton Bros, the Skeleton Lords, and the Chariot. See, then you've got the Rat... the Rat Congregation boss thing. And you can skip that and get to the Rotten. That's 9 so far as I can tell. And then I'm trying to think. Am I missing one? I can't remember. Oh, I guess you could do Najka as well, because you can get... Actually, no, like, I don't think there's any Fragrant Branch that you can find before defeating a boss. Can't get Skeleton Lords if you not kill Dragon Rider. Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. So yeah, I think his number's off a little bit. Anyway. Let's see. For anyone who hasn't done New Game Plus and Dark Souls 2, don't do it. You get even more enemies and annoying red phantoms. Oh boy. All right. Let's see if he makes a point here. All right. Well, that was the end of that video. Yeah. So, all right, we're gonna wrap up sort of this point about linearity real quick, but the point about Dark Souls 1 and 2 being linear or non-linear, but see, the difference between what he said and what Mahler was talking about, what I've talked about a lot, is the options available for going through the game's areas, right? Because when it comes to Dark Souls 1, you have to think about how things are connected, right? For example, the Undead Asylum is attached to Firelink Shrine. Firelink Shrine is attached to Undead Burg, the Valley of Drakes, New Londo, and the catacombs, right? That's 5 areas connected to the hub, right? In terms of those areas, Undead Burg connects to Undead Parish. Undead Parish connects to Sen's Fortress. Sen's Fortress doesn't really connect to Anor Londo, but it leads you to Anor Londo. Anor Londo connects you to the Painted World. All right, and the Duke's Archives. The Duke's Archives connects you to Crystal Cave. All right, so now let's go down some of the other paths from Firelink. The Catacombs leads you to the Tomb of the Giants. The Valley of Drakes leads you to Blighttown, and then Blighttown can lead you to Ash Lake, or it can lead you to the Demon Ruins, which then leads to Lost Izalith. Then we get the Valley of Drakes also connecting to Dark Rouge, I believe it's Basin, which also connects to Undead Burg. And then Darkroot Basin connects to Darkroot Garden, which also connects to the Undead which also connects to Undead Parish. And then we have the DLs, and then we have the Kiln of the First Flame connecting to Firelink Shrine. Right, so right off the back, you got me going, okay, this area connects to this area, and this area, and this area, which also connect to this area, and this area, which also connect to this area, this area. The areas connect to each other in different ways, as opposed to Demon Souls, for example, which usually had one level that led to another level, that led to the next level, that led to the next level, and then when you were done, you would leave that area and progress through a different pathway. You wouldn't go back through one area to go down another pathway that was available. Dark Souls 2 has a thing where it does I've mentioned this before. Dark Souls 1 has options in the first sort of third of the game. The middle is a little bit linear because you have to go through Sen's Fortress and Anor Londo, and then the last third of the game is non-linear again because you have to go to the 4 corners to get the 4 Lord Souls and also get the Artorias stuff for the DLC, right? So those things connect. There are branching pathways and alternate routes to get from different places in the early game and in the late game of Dark Souls 1, right? In Dark Souls 2, how does that compare? Well, you go from Things Betwixt to Majula, right? And then Majula connects to Forest of Fallen Giants, Hades Tower, the Grave of Saints, and the Huntsman's Copse, right? Those 4 areas, right? What do those 4 areas connect to? All right. Hades Tower leads to No Man's Wharf, which connects to the Lost Bastille. Forest of Fallen Giants also connects to Lost Bastille, so that's good. We have multiple paths to the same area. That's good. That's like Dark Souls 1 in terms of nonlinearity. Then we have the Grave of Saints, which leads to the Gutter. Then it leads to the Rotten, or not to the Rotten, but yeah, it leads to the Rotten. But it also leads to the to Black Gulch, right? And then we have the Lost Bastille leading to Sinner's Rise. I technically count that as the same area, even though it's listed differently, but it's kind of besides the point. Then we have Huntsman's Copse, which leads us to Earthen Peak, which then leads us to Iron Keep. All right, and then once we get all that stuff done, then we can take that other pathway from Majula to Shaded Woods, and that leads us to the Doors of Pharos. Then we go through Brightstone Cove Seldora, and then we double back and go back through Shaded Woods to get to Drainlight Castle, and then we go from Drainlight Castle to Shrine of Amana to the Undead Crypt, and then we go back to Shaded Woods to go to Aldia's Keep, then the Dragon Eyrie, then the Dragon Shrine, then we go to the Memory of Jay in the Forest of Fallen Giants, and then we either go to kill Vendrick to unlock Aldia, or we go back to Drainlight Castle to wrap up the game, right? So there's a lot of options in the beginning, but each pathway is sort of linear in and of itself, right? Huntsman's Copse, only, you go from Majula to Huntsman's Copse to Earthen Peak to Iron Keep. Those are the only options. There's no side pathways, right? Unless you count the offshoots for like one boss, like 1 or 2 bosses, for like one boss here and there. Right, but in terms of the levels themselves, they each lead from one to the other, to the other, to the other until they're done. Then you go down another pathway, right? There's hardly any overlapping in those areas unless you just come back through them just because, right? Then you have the pathway to the Rotten, which is largely identical, right? You go through the Rat area, You can skip it, but then you go through the gutter, then you go to Black Gulch, and then you're done with that pathway, right? You know, like you've done the thing, right? Again, a pathway that's very linear. You can skip one step, but it's still linear, and then you're done. Then you get to the Lost Sinner. That pathway has a little bit more variety because you have the Forest of Fallen Giants leading to the Lost Bastille, or you have Hades Tower leading to No Man's Wharf, which also leads to the Lost Bastille, right? And then you have the Shaded Woods area, which is an area that connects to multiple places, but it connects to different pathways, right? It connects to Shaded Woods connects you to the Doors of Pharos, then that leads you to Brightstone Cove Seldora, and then by the end of that, you're done with that pathway. Then you go to Drangleic Castle through Shaded Woods, then you go to the Shrine of Amana, then you go to the Undead Crypt, right? And then you leave that area because you're basically done. And then you go through Aldia's Keep, then the Dragon Eyrie, then the Dragon Shrine, and then you go back to the Forest of Fallen Giants to go through some memories again. Then you go back to Drangleic Castle to wrap up the game and get your endings, right? There's a lot of very linear stuff in terms of the level-to-level sort of progression, in terms of like going from one area to the next. Dark Souls interconnected a lot of different levels across a lot of different things, and that's part of the reason why Dark Souls 1 can be progressed in several different ways from the get-go. You know, and they overlap sort of through each other that unlock shortcuts for later things. Whereas Dark Souls 2, by comparison, has several options available from the get-go, but as you unlock those options, they become extremely linear once you get to them and once you choose them. And that's sort of the ultimate issue with the linearity discussion between Dark Souls 1 and 2. A lot of options in Dark Souls 2's areas... a lot of options in Dark Souls 2 areas are simply go down this pathway until the end, maybe take a side route, and then you're done. Do another pathway, right? It's very linear in terms of you have a couple of pathways to go down, but that's it. They're just pathways. They don't intermingle like Dark Souls 1 did with a lot of its levels connecting to a lot of other levels simultaneously. All right, now I need to catch up on chat because I really have to pee and I want to end the stream. So let's see. That was painful, just non-stop comparisons to Dark Souls 1 and 3 and forcing weird bugs to make DS2 look harder, or look better. Yep. He is weak to poison, so if you can get your hands on it and want to use it, I recommend trying it. Okay. Now let's toy with the idea that Mahler is manipulating his footage. Why would you do the same thing that makes you and DS2 look worse? Yep. Said it before, but DS2, if played as intended to final boss, is the same as Demon Souls, just with more bosses between finishing the 4 Lord Souls and getting to final boss rush. Yeah, it's very linear once you reach the Shaded Woods stuff for progression past the 4 old ones. I haven't played Demon Souls, but based on how it has a similar health and heal system, you're probably right. I've never played it either, just watched videos on it. I know Vangeris agrees it's more of a Demon Souls sequel than a DS1 sequel. Yeah, it's a weird mix of the two, but it's got a lot more in line with Demon Souls than Dark Souls in terms of the way it works. All right, bring up your color-coded graphs from your commentaries, Vangeris. They show it for all 4 games, haha. I would do that, but I have to find the timestamp. I'd have to find the timestamp in either my Dark Souls 2 video or my Dark Souls 3 video, and that's going to take too long. But I essentially made my point, right? See, today was really fun, Andrew. I told you it was happening. Sure was, Sheep. Glad I didn't miss it. Glad you didn't miss it either. It was unmissable. I wish Shane got to see all of it. We'll see. Sure he'll pitch into the chat on Discord later. Oh God, please no. Yep. All right, well, that's going to be it for this stream. Next time we'll be tackling what I think was Domo's biggest... I'm pretty sure he's got 2 videos that are near the 40-minute mark. This next one's over 40 minutes. I think it's 42 minutes off the top of my head. So that'll be a big one. That'll be a big one when we get to it, but we'll have to get to it when we can. But for now, I'd just like to thank you all for tuning in and being on this journey. We're getting there. We're getting there. The next couple of videos have a lot of stuff to cover, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah. So just let me know what you think of different things in the comments of the video once I re-upload this, as well as I hope you enjoyed the stream, and I will, I'm pretty sure I'll be free next Saturday. So we'll see what happens next Saturday, and until then, God bless.